Namaste. Thought is an entity central to psychology, philosophy, and spirituality. To have some interesting thoughts about thought, we have with us today psychoanalysis consultant Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, can we start with the most difficult question, how to define thought?
We are trying to define a definition. We are into a situation where we are trying to define thought using thought. And we don't even know how far and how deep we can know something or not know something on this particular point. This is an area where we don't know much about how far can thought know oneself in an auto-knowing mode and define oneself. Because most of the time, even when thought is thinking about thought, it is getting into a duality of the subject and the object. But how far can it auto-know itself
Okay.
is something we ourselves don't know. When we try to define something, we have a situation where thought is trying to define something. And the very fact of the matter that there is the other to be known, and that knowing can happen only through a process which has limitations, puts a limitation on how far can we know or define something. At that point, we feel only if thought could be one with the object, one could auto know and know completely. But when we are actually in this situation of thought trying to define itself, we realize that this is even more difficult than the subject object situation, because we don't even know how far thought can auto know itself and express itself. Allowing that absoluteness of knowledge to go by and being content with the best that we can, there are broadly two ways of defining thought: a negative definition and a positive definition. Negative definition can be given in this way. We can look at the area of psychology in two zones, the micro and the macro. In the micro zone, we have entities like stimulus, sensation, perception, and so on. In the macro zone, we have three broad entities: thought, affect, and behavior. When we have these three entities in the macro zone, thought, affect, and behavior, we can give a negative definition to thought by saying, in the macro area of psychology, what is not feeling, what is not affect or behavior is thought. That is giving a negative definition of thought relative to entities which are present in the macro zone of psychology. There is another way of defining it traditionally as it is defined, that it is a psychological entity which is used to know, to recollect, to arrive at a decision. And this is an entity which actually separates us most from other animals, because we define human beings as thinking animals, and all that we have been able to do much ahead of other species on our planet primarily has to do with our application of thought. And so, even in social life, we celebrate thought and behavior more than the affect. Affect is a neglected child of psychology, in at least the social area. So we have a Nobel Prize which rewards good thinking, We have prizes which reward good behavior, but we don't have any prize which rewards good feeling. So
Mm.
in that sense, thought can have a positive definition as we just gave. And this definition is what is typically used in psychology textbooks and cognitive sciences, the cognitive psychology part of psychology, that gives a more elaborate information processing oriented definition of thought. But the essence of it is always this, that it is a psychological entity which we use to know, to decide, to recollect, and to process something.
Right. Now, if we see that way, you talked about micro and macro level. I want you to explain how is thought seen in psychology, philosophy, and spirituality.
Psychology looks at thought in two ways. In an academic way, to know what thought is, to research on thought, how thought arises, how it proceeds, how it goes ahead. And on the other side, look at how far can we understand the neurology of thought. So that is one way of looking at thought from, by and large, a cognitive science perspective, or in general also from psychological perspective, an empirical academic way at understanding the process of thinking. On the other hand, the psychotherapy part of psychology tries to use thought for healing of psychological problems. And there, thought is applied for healing. Similarly, in other parts of psychology which are more applied, for example, sports psychology or occupational psychology or educational psychology, thought is used in order to know how we can do something better, in order to make a positive change to a situation. So in an applied form, we use thought in psychology to better a situation or to heal a psychological problem. And in an academic sense, we use thought to know what it is, how it is in an empirical way. This is how broadly psychology looks at thought. Philosophy looks at thought in a slightly different way.
Hmm.
By definition, philosophy deals with things which are not yet open to empirical investigation. And therefore, philosophy looks at thought more in terms of either philosophical questions like why should thought exist in the first place? Is thought generated in the mind, or is there a thought sphere from which we are acquiring something? Thought, once it is released, does it have a form of its own? Does it survive? Or is it just an electrical activity which starts and ends in the brain? Is it possible to think without the
Hmm.
brain? Do organisms without a nervous system also have thought? Is language always necessary for thought? What are the limitations of thought? And two very famous philosophers have done remarkable work on it. One is Immanuel Kant, who plotted out the limits of thought. How far can thinking take us? And what are the limits beyond which human thought cannot go? And the second
Okay.
person was Ludwig Wittgenstein, uh, who also plotted the limits of human knowledge, but the process was different. Immanuel Kant plotted the limits of our knowledge, the limits of our thinking, by an epistemological inquiry into thought. Wittgenstein plotted the limits of all that we can know by plotting the limits of language through which we know. And then there are also people who believe in ways of knowing other than the regular process of thought, some other forms of knowing. And there are some who are dealing with thought in a uh, pre-verbal stage of human existence. So this is how the philosophers are dealing with thoughts from various standpoints. In spirituality, the engagement with thought is slightly different. Spirituality uses thought first to have knowledge, clarify things, and get the person ready for spirituality. So the first application is to remove the cobwebs, remove the ignorance, remove the confusion, and get the person very clearly dedicated to his spiritual pursuit. The second aspect that spirituality uses thought is to use thought to acquire freedom from desires, fears, emotions, and including the compulsive nature of thinking. So you use thought for freedom of thought, freedom from thought. You use thought for freedom from emotion. You use thought for freedom from desires and fears, which is what is in Indian context called the path of knowledge or Jnana Yoga. There are others in spirituality who look at thought as an obstacle to spiritual realization. So they want you to do less of thinking, more of believing, and calming down the mind. So that is the way of many Buddhist schools and the Zen school, where essentially you calm down the mind, you think very few things. And uh, in that calm mind, with less of thinking, you are able to have more of insights, transformative insights, rather than just going this purposeless thinking going on. And lastly, the goal of many spiritual schools is to enter into a state of no thought, or enter into a state of pure awareness, or enter into a state of oneness with existence, which is beyond thought. So this is the way spirituality looks at thought as a necessity, as a facilitator, as a tool, as an obstacle, and as an entity to be transcended.
Right. So, if we see these three different platforms, now if we switch it over to psychotherapy, what is the significance of thought in psychotherapy in general and psychoanalysis in particular?
Once we come into the area of psychotherapy to heal psychological problems, there are three broad schools in that area: the cognitive school, the affective school, and the behavioral school. The cognitive school believes that thought is the way to cure any particular problem, and therefore it focuses largely on thoughts. They believe thought leads to feelings, leads to behavior. And in psychopathology, the core thing is to proceed through thoughts to heal the pathology. So they are the ones who use thought as a primary tool for healing. And they also believe thought is the primary cause for the pathology in some way. So for them, essentially, it is errorsome thinking which has to be corrected at some level, conscious or unconscious or whatever. Then we have the affective school, which says that it is not thought but affect which has to be engaged with and released for solving the psychopathology. So for them, thought leading to feeling leading to behavior is not true. They believe often it is the affect which is repressed which leads to thoughts. So for them, often it is affect leading to thoughts. And the example they gave is, say, obsessive compulsive disorder. The person keeps thinking about the same thing till the core problem, which is producing anxiety, is dealt with. Suppose somebody is doing this because of the Oedipal fixation. When the Oedipal problem is dealt with, catharsis happens and the affect is released, the obsession automatically falls. And the obsessive thoughts come to an end. So it is the release of affect which is trapped in the Oedipus, which leads to the cessation of obsessive thoughts. There is another school of behavioral approach which says through behavior, we can modify thought and behavior, thought and affect, right? Much more
Hmm.
than the other way around. And therefore,
Oh,
in fact, it is a three-way traffic. There is a three-way traffic between thought, affect, and behavior. And my personal belief is that in any healing, we need to use all three of them and not be camp follower of any of these particular schools, which unfortunately is a situation today. That most therapists are camp followers of either of these schools. Secondly, when we look at psychoanalysis, although psychoanalysis does not believe that thought leads to feelings lead to behavior, but and psychoanalysis also does not believe that thought is the primary vehicle through which uh, problem is caused or problem can be healed. However, there is certain significance of thought even in psychoanalysis which we have not actually respected enough.
mhm.
And that is uh, in psychoanalysis, when we are revisiting any event, the entry into the event always is through thought. It is rarely directly through feelings. Most of
Right.
the times, through thought, you enter into a past event and then the feelings come up. This is the most common thing. Rarely
Hmm.
it happens that you enter with feelings and then thoughts come up.
The thought
So,
becomes the gateway to the affect.
yeah. So, normally when we recollect an event, first it is the cognitive recollection and slowly we get into the affective part. And this is where we don't realize how important thought is, number one. Number two, with respect to mildly repressed affect, people feel good when they just talk about it. The mere ability to express something in cognitive terms, even if affect involved is very small, all of the affect may not have come out. And yet there is relaxation, there is relief. The cognitive knowledge about one's pathology also gives one relief. So, thought also has its own significance in psychoanalysis itself. And often, when we try to access affect and affect is not coming up, we have to do a lot of defense work to undo the defenses so that the affect can come up. And that undoing of defenses primarily is a cognitive work because affect is
Hmm.
completely replaced. So, even to access affect, we have to do a lot of cognitive work. And therefore, it is not that without cognitive tools, psychoanalysis actually works. It may not have cognition as the primary focus, but directly, indirectly, thought is significant and cognitive tools are used in psychoanalysis also.
Hmm. So, do you believe that change is needed in the way we engage with the concept of thought in psychotherapy?
Very much so.
Okay.
Because I believe we have looked at thought, affect, and feelings very superficially and put them into three camps.
Hmm.
But actually, these three are not homogeneous entities. These three are very heterogeneous categories with millions of citizens inhabiting each of the territories. For example, let us take thought. Let us take an example. A person has obsessive thoughts because of the Oedipus complex.
Hmm.
Now, there is at one level, there are obsessive thoughts which
Hmm.
are conscious.
Right.
Then the cause of that is the Oedipus complex. And in the Oedipus complex, also, there are some ideas, there are some thoughts which are trapped. And then, when the Oedipus complex was formed for the first time, certain thinking happened, which was what I call the evaluative thoughts. That when
Right.
the person realized that he has Oedipal desire,
Hmm.
and the person realizes it can have castration anxiety effects, how much effect can it have? Or if there is guilt involved, how much guilt should be involved? These are evaluation processes. So when the complex was formed for the first time, before the formation, there was evaluation of various types happening. Evaluation related to guilt, evaluation related to fear, evaluation related to object loss and emotional pain.
Evaluation is being done by the preconscious
Yeah, it is an
or the
unconscious
defense?
process that how
Okay.
much feeling should be generated to be trapped in the Oedipus.
All right. All
So
right.
when the child realizes Oedipus is not right, how wrong is it? The degree of how wrong is an evaluation process. Whether it is right or wrong also is an evaluation process. So there was a thinking involved in the manufacturing of that Oedipus complex itself. So when we go into
Right.
the manufacturing process of the Oedipus, we see thoughts there, which are the original thoughts, which are pre-complex thoughts, and in those thoughts, there are normal thoughts and evaluating thoughts. And this we are not able to differentiate because we just use the word thought. But actually, the conscious obsessive thoughts are one type of thoughts. The thoughts trapped in the Oedipus are second kind of thoughts. And those thoughts which led to the formation of Oedipus itself are third kind of thoughts which may not exist anymore. They have done their function. But their output is still there, permanent pathology. Right?
Hmm.
So that kind of thing. So we need to separate thoughts as symptom thoughts, the complex thoughts, and the pre-complex evaluation thoughts. And similarly, if we go in details of various kinds of thoughts, okay, we need to give different names. If not anything, let us at least call them T1, T2, T3 or something of that sort. Because these are not the
Some,
same.
so somewhere you mean that the thinking process, which is like the preoccupation of any right, wrong, or the quantity in which they're going to process it, that is also in a thought form.
Yeah. So one is that in the process of thinking are different kind of thoughts involved. That is one question. And second,
Hmm.
from psychological significance point of view, of course, these thoughts have different significance.
Hmm.
The pre-complex evaluation thought has a different significance. The thought inside the complex has a different significance. And the
Right.
repetitive OC thought has a different significance.
That's the outcome of it.
Yeah. So from psychological standpoint, of course, we can have different names for them. From a neurological and even a process perspective in psychology, are they different or not is a question we still need to think about.
Right.
So that is one part. The second part is the more inquiry needs into to go into what about the pre-verbal thinking,
Hmm.
because we are obsessed with thought and language together.
Yes, very much.
So we realize that when we look at the healing process, often the signs of our healing are communicated to us through dreams and through visuals and not through thoughts in terms of language, which means
Hmm.
there is some sort of thinking happening in the unconscious which does not involve language but uses more of visuals or symbolic language. So that thinking without thoughts, that is something that we have to look at, that how can we differentiate those processes? Do we also call them thoughts without language, or how do we call those things? Third
Won't it
is,
be similar to intuition?
sorry,
Won't that be similar to intuition or gut feeling? The initiating thought, which is not
that,
verbalized yet.
that will be a third type of thinking, intuition.
Okay.
So we will have the normal conscious thinking, the normal unconscious thinking, which are both in language and both are sequential. Then we have that intuitive kind of
Hmm.
thinking, which is a very different kind of a cerebral process. And then we have the
Hmm.
non-verbal sort of thinking,
Hmm.
which is more visual and symbolic in nature. So how do we use the word thought, and how do we understand those processes which are not normal? Some thought requires to be given on that. Then we look at the states of no thought, which spirituality talks about, of pure awareness. Because normally we believe that from birth to death, we cannot be without thoughts and feelings. They keep rising and falling all the time. But we have many experiences, and many yogic practices can give you short time experiences, short duration experiences of that thing. So it is not something which can happen to one in a billion. It can happen to a large number of people on a short duration. And this brings out the idea of, can we be in a state of mind without thoughts? So this
That
is
was
one more
supposed to be my
element of,
next question.
sorry.
That's what I was about to ask you, that is it possible to have a state of no thought as it is claimed in Indian spirituality and many other practices as well?
Yes, it is possible. I have personally experienced the state of no thought many times over of short duration. And when I experienced that in a series, it had almost become on demand. I have lost that practice now, and I will recultivate it,
Okay.
but it is possible. And this uh, uh, gives us a very different perspective on thoughts. And then we also have the freedom of thought, that when we are in the grip of pathology, we are not able to think out the simplest of things which are necessary for our healing.
Hmm.
So
Very true.
there, yeah, so there is a grip on our thoughts. Our thoughts are not completely free, neither from pathology nor from our karmic load, if you believe in the karmic load. So freedom
Yes,
of
of
thought
course.
is yet another area where uh, we have to completely reconsider those things. Then we also have some people who say that thoughts are not manufactured by us, they are coming from outside. We are just receiving stations. That mystical also element also has to be relooked at. So I think there are many areas related to thought in terms of genesis, in terms of what they are, in terms of types of thoughts, in terms of how they come or are they manufactured, in terms of their freedom, and in terms of our freedom from them to be in a state of no thought. All these areas, I think we have not yet um, explored enough, or at least we have not spoken about enough.
So when you talk about freedom of thought, that also reminds me of that many times in a therapeutic setup or even in the healing process, we talk about the the cyclic version of the thoughts, the patterns of thought being created, which are continuous in nature, and one is not able to escape. As we talked about the freedom of thought, how is thought related to our happiness or to the spiritual process or the progress?
It is very important because we are essentially thinking creatures. So Gautam the Buddha, he made a list of all entities in human life which cause suffering. And one of the elements in that list, I think it's a list of 12 or 14 items. And in that list, one of the elements is uh, wrong thinking. So there are two elements, I think. One is ignorance and second is wrong thinking. That either because we don't have knowledge or we are not able to think correctly, we invite misery. So one of the ways we invite suffering is this: not having knowledge or not being able to think correctly. So that is very important in everyday life also. If we are not able to use thought well, we cannot innovate anything. We cannot be at the top end of our profession. We don't get social respect, and people can fool us, and we don't become prosperous or successful. So, in personal and professional life, of course, thought is very, very important. And those who are able to use thought well progress in life. That is a very normal, practical part of it. How far it is important for happiness? Very much so. Because I think one of the things we do is we don't use thought to reflect upon what is the purpose of life or what will make us happy. And that is where we know everything in the world except how to be happy. And this is an important tragedy for most of us, that
True.
we apply thought everywhere except to the central problem, how to be happy. So thought is very important. To be knowledgeable is very important. To be able to think is very important for success in the outer world as well as success in the inner world. So we have to use thought efficiently, backed by adequate amount of knowledge and skills, both in the outer and the inner world, to really be happy. With respect to the second part of your question, spirituality has a very different and complicated orientation to thought. There are some schools in spirituality which believe that thought is only an obstacle, and they condemn thought, and they discourage thinking and reasoning, and they encourage faith, and they encourage relaxation. They believe when the mind is relaxed and focused and reasonably happy, you think less, but the output of that in spiritual progress is very high. And when you are thinking like a thinker, an intellectual, a scholar all the time, you think too much, but knowledge happens, outer success happens, but inner transformation does not happen. So they discourage thinking, and they work with high amount of relaxation, high amount of focus, and minimum amount of frequency of thoughts. That is how they work with. There is another school in spirituality which thinks very differently. They use thought to operate upon our desires, our fears, our emotions, and also our thoughts. And by using thought, they try to get freedom. And this is the path of knowledge, or what in India we call the Gyan Yoga. Then we use thought to operate upon our desires, our fears, our thoughts, and our emotions, and to be free from all of them. And third is a more hybrid school, which says that till a point, thought is the helper, and after that point, thought is an obstacle. So one has to use thought and knowledge and work hard with thought and knowledge till a point, and then one has to surrender and let go. Sri Aurobindo puts a very good statement in this regard. He says, thought was the helper, thought is the balm. That till a particular point, it was the helper, and it was not only helper, it was absolutely necessary. Without good thought, good knowledge, progress was not possible. But after a point, you get into a state of surrender, and if you continue with that earlier orientation, you actually lose out. So the hybrid school uses thought and knowledge very efficiently, very proficiently till a point, and then asks you to relax and let go of thoughts and allow thoughts only to come only and when necessary. So spirituality has very different sort of engagement. Different spiritual schools have different sort of engagement with thought, and you have from using only thought to condemning thought, the whole continuum and everyone in between in the hybrid position. The goal, however, is of consensus. Everyone believes that the goal is to have the mastery and freedom from thought. So thought is not compulsive. You are able to get into a state of no thought on demand. And you use thought instead of thought using you. So you are a master of your thought. You don't condemn thought. It's a great tool. All that human beings have been able to do in this world is because of thought. So thought is not to be condemned, but you have to achieve mastery over it, and you can use it whenever you want. It should not be your master and happen compulsively against your will or without your will. So that is the way spirituality looks at it, that even after getting into a state of enlightenment, which is a state of no thought, bliss, and awareness, you still after that have to use thought to do anything in this world. But then you are using thought on demand, not compulsively otherwise. So this is how spirituality has a very complicated relationship with thought. And in fact, to add to the irony and the complication, many spiritual schools actually have very great tools to increase the efficiency of thought and to increase the efficiency of intuition,
Acha.
where they use
Okay.
thought and visualization as tools. They use mantra and thought as tools. They use just idle therapy and thought in the idle therapy as a tool, right, for self progress. So it's a very complicated thing, from condemnation to worship and everything in between. All these orientations you find in different schools of spirituality towards this entity called thought.
That's quite deep, in fact, how the thought becomes a faith, or how thought converts into a belief system, and how you can be just free from it after a certain practice. Mr. Vedya, in your model of the mind, you have dealt with the process of thought and bringing epistemology onto psychoanalysis. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, when we go deep into something, often we forget the truth on the surface. We get overwhelmed with details and we forget the macro picture with which we started. I think this is happening in psychology also.
Mm.
The heat model talks about the whole process of psychological movement. It starts with desire, and the desire uses thought, and as a result of thought, there is some action, and as a result of action, there is some feeling evoked,
Mm.
and that ultimately leads to pleasure or pain of some kind or the other. So on one hand, you have desire as the starting point, and the end point is pleasure or pain, often accompanied, if pain is there, often accompanied by fear or anger. And if
Right.
pleasure is there, often accompanied by the need to repeat the experience. But essentially, if you look at the whole psychological process, it starts with desire and ends with pleasure or pain. And thought, feeling, and behavior are in between. So once we realize this, that thought, feeling, and behavior are tools which are used in human existence to satisfy desire, so that ultimately pleasure or pain or progress or essence of some experience can be drawn by something, right, in us which wants to have desire and those experiences and draw essence of those experiences. Whether we call it the self or the soul or the person or just our innate design, whatever we call it. But if we see a purpose behind desire, the purpose is one, pleasure, two, survival, sorry, one, survival, two, pleasure, three, uh, experiences of different types, fourth, progress, and fifth, spiritual evolution. These seem to be the five purposes of human existence broadly. And for these purposes, we have desires. And desires work in order to go into action, they pass through thoughts and feelings. They are involved in the process. So if we look into that kind of thing, then in the heat model, I call thought as a process element. Sorry, a faculty element.
Mm.
It is a faculty.
Okay.
It is a faculty in us,
Mm.
right? So Desire uses this faculty in order to realize itself, to satisfy itself. Now, the way desire uses this faculty is, suppose I get thirsty. My biological system tells me my body needs water. So, because there is scarcity of water in my body, my biology creates a desire for water. Once this desire is activated, this desire uses the faculty of thought to find out where the water will be available and at what cost. Will it be available for free easily, or do I have to snatch it from somebody? If I snatch it from somebody, is he going to beat me up? If he's going to beat me up, will the pain of being beaten up be more than the pleasure of quenching the thirst, or vice versa? And then I make a decision. So the desire, the quest for water, the desire for water uses the faculty of thought to arrive at a decision and a process which is used for action. And once action happens and I drink water, the experience creates some feelings, either a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling. So in that sense, the affect is generated later, but the thought is used as a tool to facilitate the generation of the affect. And ultimately, from this whole experience, some essence is extracted by something in the center of me. And
Can
every
we say it's like a sieve in which the entire process is happening, and there is a sieve from which the thought conditions how much effect is to be generated, or how many feelings, or whether to continue with the desire or not. Can we say that there is a
yes,
filter,
yeah,
a sieve
yeah, yeah. So what will happen is, if
of
the
thought?
desire is happening for the first time, the thought will involve in a simple process of how to satisfy this desire at what cost.
Okay.
But if the experience has happened before, then in the memory, there already will be lessons from the past experience.
Of
And
course.
thought will access that part also while it goes into decision making. So what will happen is that thought there is used as a faculty by desire towards an end, right? Which is affect and ultimately some sort of pleasure and some sort of pain. And from that pleasure and pain, and from this experience of affect and thought, some juice is extracted by somebody who wants to experience all this. Now, this is the way the heat model looks at thought as a faculty elemental which is between desire and action. And the action is followed by feelings and pleasure and pain, and ultimate pleasure and pain are the resultant emotions, different kind of pleasures and pains. Now, this is one aspect of the heat model. The second way in which the heat model deals with thought is to bring in epistemology into psychoanalysis. And that is to say, if we use Immanuel Kant's model, that how the thinking process happens, he gives a sequence of stimulus falling on the body. So if I lift this bottle, if I see this bottle, the optical stimulus goes in. Yeah.
Yeah.
The optical stimulus goes in. The stimulus from my hand goes in. I feel the weight. I can see what is inside. And all this stimulus is collected together, coordinated by somebody in my brain, some entity in my brain. And ultimately, I realize this is a bottle full of water. Right? Now, that process is described by Immanuel Kant in these stages of stimulus, sensation, perception, conception, knowledge, and wisdom. That through this process, the whole thinking process happens. So he goes into the epistemology of the thinking process. The heat model brings in this epistemological approach to the analysis of formation of psychoanalytic complexes. For example, if we look at the Kleinian concept that the child attacks the bad breast and then fears the bad breast attacking it. Okay. Then we can apply this epistemological concept to find out how is the child thinking the attack is going to come. Why does the one
Hmm.
child think it is going to come, another child thinks it is not going to come, the third child thinks it's going to be very brutal. So what are the epistemological processes happening which result in a particular complex? So we go into the
Right.
epistemological part of how the complexes get manufactured in early childhood. And there we can look at the core variables, which are the most important variables in that epistemological process. So that is the way the heat model deals with thought by bringing an epistemology uh, of the thinking process into the manufacturing process of the complexes.
Right. So we understand that we talk about positive thoughts, we talk about negative thoughts, and we use our wisdom of self and the environment. That was really a thought provoking and thought engaging discussion today. And we had today an interesting technical discussion on the subject of thought. Thank you, Mr. Vaidya, so much. In coming episodes, we shall be discussing two other entities of the triad, effect, and action. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.